Yeah. Okay. Hello. Hi. We are live.
Hello, hello.
This is
Hello.
episode 8 for faculty, and today we have Professor Marcelo Lima.
Hello,
You are
good
highly.
morning, everyone.
Good morning. Thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure.
You're really highly requested for this show, by the way. Everyone really seems to love you.
You have a huge fan base, so congratulations on that.
So, firstly, how's your semester going?
Well, everything is fine. So I've been at Habib for more than 2 years already. And I think it's always hard to adapt, not only to a new country, but also to a new work environment. And I can say for sure that I have already adapted to Habib University by now.
That's great. So, how has the semester been treating you?
Well, it's fine. I mean, it's week 12, right?
Yeah.
Or 13?
Week third. Oh no, it's
12.
Yeah.
12.
Yes. Except for those unexpected holidays and class cancellations last week,
Yeah.
everything is doing great. I'm teaching Pakistan and modern South Asia for the third time, and I feel that the more I teach this course, the more I understand the country where I'm living, the society where I'm living. At the beginning, I was very reluctant to teach it because I had just moved to Pakistan, but now I'm very thankful for being requested to teach this course because I have learned a lot. And it is a course, just like I tell my students at the beginning of every semester, it is a course that I get to learn much more from my students than they learn from me.
So, talking about PAMSA, were you aware of South Asian history before coming to Pakistan?
I had a very narrow perspective, sorry, of South Asian history. So in Brazilian schools, we don't learn much about. So history is a compulsory subject, but we don't learn much about Asian history. Usually, there is a chapter about Afro-Asian decolonization in which they briefly mention like a couple of countries, including India. They focus more on Gandhi and Nehru, and at the end of the chapter, they say, "Hey, there was a part of India that didn't want to be part of India; they wanted to be Pakistan." So I had this very narrow misconception according to which all Muslim, non-Muslim wanted to be part of India, which is one of the first things that I unlearned when I started teaching PAMSA. Right? I did make some readings about South Asian history before coming to Habib, but it was only after I started teaching PAMSA that I actually learned. So it was a process of learning and teaching at the same time, which was really, really hard.
Okay, so, what brought you to Pakistan?
Habib, definitely Habib. I tell this story to all my students. There was this one day in September 2019, I forgot the day. I woke up early and I was procrastinating because I didn't want to study. And then I decided to search for academic positions anywhere in the world. And I entered this website and I typed history positions. And there was this position like Habib University in Karachi searching for historians, experts in South Asian history or Islamic history. It wasn't my expertise, but I said, okay, there's no, I think I should try it, right? Perhaps they can also accept me. So I applied for the job. 2 weeks later, I got an email from the uh, HR or from OEP, I'm not quite sure, inviting me for an interview. I was really nervous for the interview, but it turned out very well. I had a very interesting conversation with Dr. Hadis. He seemed to like my proposal. He seemed to like my idea of teaching Latin American history at Habib. And then here I am.
Okay.
That's interesting.
Yes.
So, when you came to Pakistan, did you just come to Karachi, or have you explored other
No,
parts?
just Karachi. This is one of the things that I am embarrassed to say. I've never been outside Karachi in Pakistan.
But it's only been 2 years, so I think it's fair.
Yeah, and there was also pandemic,
Yeah.
COVID, and I'm writing my dissertation
Mhm.
and teaching at the same time. So I wish I had, but I don't really have the time to visit other places outside Karachi. I am finalizing my dissertation now. We're gonna have our winter break in December, right? I think
Yes.
December.
Third week.
Third week of December starts our winter break. Depending on how I go in my dissertation, how much progress I make, I'll do an effort to travel to spend like the winter break in another place, perhaps Islamabad or Lahore, but I can't promise anything.
So for those who don't know dissertation, can you tell them?
Sorry, a dissertation.
Yes.
Yeah, so I'm currently writing my doctoral thesis or dissertation. In Brazil, we call it thesis. Here, I think they call it dissertation. I'm not quite sure. But I've been writing my dissertation. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Minas Gerais in Brazil since 2019. And since I joined Habib, I'm struggling to conciliate, right, my work and my PhD. It's been really, really hard, really, really challenging. But something that I noticed, perhaps this year or at the end of last year, I'm not quite sure, is that Habib University, instead of being actually my job at Habib University, rather than posing an obstacle or rather than uh, negatively affecting my dissertation, it has actually helped me a lot, much more than I expected, for a number of reasons. First and most important one is that by grading students' assignments, by reading students' assignments, I get much more critical about my own writing, right? Because many of the mistakes that you commit that make me deduct marks from you are also mistakes that I make in my dissertation, and I do not notice when I'm writing. But when I read your assignments and I see, okay, this is wrong, but I am also committing it, so I should also stop doing that in my dissertation. So grading students' papers gives me a much stronger critical sense that helps me improve my work. And many of the courses that I taught, including PEMSA, which has nothing to do with my dissertation, they also gave me some historical insights that helped me develop my dissertation. Right. So just another example. The topic of my research is the foreign policy of the Brazilian military regime. So Brazil, just like Pakistan, had a military regime. Just one. Pakistan had several, right? Brazil had only one, although it lasted for a long time, 21 years. And it was one of the main reasons why they justified the seizure of power, why the military justified their rule, was to protect Brazil from communism. Okay? But in 1974, when Brazil was still under a military regime, Brazil recognized communist China, which is something very challenging, right? How do I explain in my dissertation that despite being influenced by anti-communist ideas, the Brazilian military regime, who seized power under the pretext of protecting the country from communism, how could they still recognize communist China? And the Pakistani relations with communist China are a very interesting aspect because Pakistan has never been a communist country. It was ruled by an anti-communist dictator, Ayub Khan, who had a very close relationship with communist China, right? And understanding Pakistani history and also teaching other courses like the Global Post-Colony helped me understanding or helped me coming up with a very strong argument on chapter 6 of my dissertation, which is the most challenging chapter of my dissertation. And it is a chapter that definitely would have been unthinkable without my experience here at Habib. As soon as I finalize my dissertation, I will be writing the acknowledgements, and there will be like a special section of the acknowledgements in English just for Habib University, for my colleagues, and for my students. My dissertation is in Portuguese, which is very sad because I wanted my students to read it as well. But if I do have the option of writing a dissertation in English, but it would be much harder to find someone to read my dissertation and to be part of the committee because the English language is not as widely spoken in Brazil as it is here in Pakistan, not even in the academic video. So it's a challenge.
So speaking of languages, did you face a challenge coming here and speaking not only in Urdu and also in English?
Yes, definitely. So I don't speak Urdu. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I know a couple of words, but
For example,
the first, that's a funny story, you know. How much time do you have?
oh,
We have to
we have a lot of time for funny
Okay.
stories.
Sorry, because sometimes I get excited.
Yeah.
If I talk too much, you will feel free to interrupt me. So the first word in Urdu that I learned in Urdu was azadi. But I learned that way before coming to Pakistan.
Okay.
I learned this in a Bollywood movie,
Which
Which
one?
one?
Mission Kashmir. Have you ever watched it?
I've heard of
Yeah.
it, but haven't.
It's an action movie about, so again, a Bollywood movie that depicts independence struggles in Kashmir in a very negative light. But I remember that one of the first scenes of that movie was this guy who, so it was a Kashmiri doctor,
Mm-hmm.
and he received a patient, a Muslim patient. He was treating a Muslim patient, and this Muslim patient came to him and said, "Doctor, I have a very strong pain in my chest." And the doctor asked him, "Okay, tell me more about it." And he said, "There's a voice inside of my chest saying, Azadi, Azadi, Azadi." And then he drops again and he kills the doctor because the doctor was treating Indian soldiers. And this guy was a member of the Kashmir Liberation Movement. For some reason, I never forgot it. I found the word beautiful, like Azadi, Azad, right? So this was the first word that I learned. The second one, I think the second one was chalo, because of Karim. Whenever I call Karim, there was the chalo word there. Pani, shukriya. What else? Himarat, which is building. Right?
Yeah.
Hana,
Hana.
eat, roti, bread. So I lived in Malaysia for 1 year. Some words of Malay, they are similar to Urdu words, either because they descend from the Arabic language, they stem from the Arabic language, or because they come from Sanskrit, right? So there are some common, some very similar words. But to the issue of English, right? Teaching in English was a great challenge for me. I'm not gonna lie. Teaching is hard, even in your own language. I remember when I started teaching in Brazil, even in Portuguese, it was very hard because teaching is not like having a normal conversation. There's a certain vocabulary, there's a certain choice of words that you have to make, which makes teaching in any language really hard, right? So this is my first time. Habib University was my first time teaching in English. At the beginning, it was very hard. I had to rehearse several times before my classes. I had to search for keywords in the dictionaries. I needed to have like some notes to follow, which I still do to a certain extent, but not in the same extent that I used to do back in 2020. And hopefully in the next few years, I will be more confident to teach in English.
Do you
Right?
have a funny Karachi story to share?
A funny Karachi story. Okay. Not so funny, but there was a story. So near where I live, there is a park which, so it's in Sindhi Muslim Block B, and it took me some time to find that park. I didn't know it was there. And I finally found out that there was a nice park near my place. I said, "Oh, I'm gonna come here every day." And so I walked into the park and I started like walking, just relaxing. And then there was this Indian lady this lady who approached me, and she started yelling at me in Urdu. And of course, I couldn't understand. The only thing I understood was that she was saying ladies' park.
Oh.
And I was like, "Oh my God, this is a ladies' park." And then I explained her, I apologized. I told her that, okay, I'm not a Pakistani and I didn't know this was a ladies' park. I'm sorry, I'm leaving. There was a girl passing by at the same time saying, "Oh, you can come here after 8 p.m. It's fine." No way I'm going there after 8 p.m. because after 8 p.m. my area is completely empty.
Mhm.
But in my defense, there were no signs in the park. This is something that I always do in Pakistan. Whenever I go to public places, I search for signs. Whenever I say family park, or whenever I see family park or ladies park, I don't enter, right? In this park, there was nothing.
Mhm.
There were some signs in Urdu, perhaps they were saying something about ladies park, but I don't speak Urdu, but I don't think the signs were saying that. The signs, I think they were saying just the timings of the park. They were not saying that it was strictly ladies' park. And there were many other men walking into the park at the same time.
Mhm.
But they were going to the mosque, which is inside the park. And this is why the security, the guard didn't stop me from entering the park. Right? But anyway, it was an experience, not really fun. For me, it wasn't fun. For you, it might be fun. Ryan laughed a lot when I told him, Professor Ryan, he was really amused to hear that story. But it was something that created an awareness in me as in so the next time I go to public places, I should be more aware about it. Okay. Other fun stories include like whenever people usually they think I'm a Pakistani, but whenever they see I'm not a Pakistani, they always assume that I'm a Pashtun, so they always ask Pashtun, Pashtun. I said no. Some even ask me if I'm Arab, like you speak Arabic, and I said no. And then they ask, so where are you from? I'm from Brazil, and many of them have never heard of Brazil. Some of them ask whether Brazil is a Muslim country or it's an Arab country. But it's fine. It's I think this is all part of the experience of living in another country.
Have you been to Zainab Market?
Yes, I've been there a couple of times. My mother likes the pashminas, so both times I've been to Brazil since I came to Pakistan, I went to Zainab Market to buy some pashmina for her and for my auntie's grandmother, my mom's friends. They all love pashmina a lot, right? And although you do find those kind of fabric in Brazil, they're usually imported from Europe. Uh, they're usually Pakistanis, but the Pakistanis sell to Europe, Europeans sell to Brazil, so the price it's really, really expensive. And yeah, they're very beautiful. I also bought some souvenirs for my parents and for my friends. A place which I haven't been yet was Empress Market. They say it's a very nice place as well, but I still didn't have the opportunity to go there.
So, do people treat you differently when they realize you're a foreigner?
I think that depends a lot on which place I am.
Okay.
So, for example, when I'm buying fruits here in front of the campus, there are some fruit stalls there. Whenever they see that I'm not Pakistani, they try to, even though they do not speak English, they try to, at least the numbers, they try to tell me the numbers in English. But something that I was told was going to happen and never actually happened is that I never had the experience of sellers trying to increase the price when they know that I'm a
I was
foreigner.
just going to ask you.
It never happened.
Food to buy.
Believe it or not, it has never happened. The prices that I've paid for the fruits here have always been very fair prices. I even ask other Pakistani friends whether this price is fair. They say it's fair. So it was a very pleasant experience.
That's good.
There was something I was going to say, I forgot. We were talking about Pashtun, about the fruits. Yes, another fun story which I just remembered. So I always go home by Karim or Uber, right? So Uber is no longer working in Karachi. Yeah, but so I'm using either Karim or Baikia.
Right.
And I tried using InDrive, but they never accept my offer, so I just uninstall the app. But sometimes the drivers usually call me, right, to ask me questions.
Yeah.
And whenever I tell them like Muji Urdu nahi aati, there are two reactions. Those who can speak English, they start speaking English, and those who cannot speak English, they keep speaking Urdu but louder because they assume that by speaking louder, I will understand, which obviously doesn't make much sense. And some students, they have a similar or an analogous approach, right? So they don't come to classes, they don't submit their assignments on time, they submit poor essays, and they try to make up for their losses or for their poor performance by participating more in class.
You're right.
And I tell them, just like speaking louder in Urdu will not make me understand, participating in class will not make up for the fact that there are a lot of other problems that you must address.
So, what was your first impression of being here?
Here, Karachi or in Habib?
Karachi.
Well, I came to Karachi in August 2020 during the pandemic,
Okay.
right? So I think this played a huge.
Oh, that was
role.
a very peak.
Yeah, that was the peak. There were no
Mhm.
vaccines. It was in like the climax
Yeah.
of the pandemic. Uh, I was impressed. I think the first thing that I noticed on my way from the airport to the hotel to Mehran Hotel in Sharai Faisal was that there was this guy named Nelson paintings all over.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Every wall I looked, there was a Nelson, and I was like, okay, this Nelson guy must be very powerful here in Karachi, right? Um, I like the mosques. I like the mosques. The
Yeah.
architecture of the mosques, I find it very nice and very interesting. But I'm not going to lie to you. My first months at Habib, in Karachi, in Pakistan, were miserable. Not because of Karachi, not because of Habib, but because there were so many things going on at the same time. I could barely process the whole pandemic.
Right.
And in the middle of the pandemic, I have to move to another country, so different from my country. And in the middle of the pandemic, I had to move to another country to start a new job, teaching in a language that I have never taught before. So there was a lot of things going on at the same time. And this is a moment that I really don't like remembering much. I think it will take some time for me to absorb and to understand that. I think only around late 2021 that things, after I got vaccinated in June, that things started going out smoothly.
So let's go back to your childhood at Brazil. How was it like? How was growing up there?
How were you as a child?
Yeah, I have always been a very quiet kid. I never really talked much. But at the same time, especially in school, I used to be very, I used to get angry very easily. This is something that my teachers usually told me. And my colleagues, noticing that I got angry very easily, they like to tease me a lot, right? But I don't mean to be unfair to my colleagues here. I also tease them a lot. So my school was a very democratic school. Everybody bullied everyone. It wasn't that this guy or this girl who was always bullied by everyone, right? Everyone bullied and was bullied at the same time. I always, since the beginning, I always hated maths, and I always liked Portuguese, right? So in Brazil, we speak Portuguese, so we have Portuguese classes, right? Not for foreigners, but like just like you learn Urdu, we learn Portuguese. I loved Portuguese classes. I loved writing and reading since like the age of 6 or 7. My parents have always noticed that I was very keen on reading and writing. So I think since that moment, I always knew that I would be going to the humanities, although I didn't really know which part of the humanities, right? Before studying, so I majored in history, but before studying history, I studied international relations for 1 year. I studied social sciences, which is slightly similar to SDP. It's a mixture of anthropology, political science, and sociology. I didn't like it much. So I abandoned both majors and I started history, which is where I finally found myself. So I majored in history. I did my master's in history. But although my PhD is also in history, in my PhD I started missing international relations. So this is why I study Brazilian foreign policy, right? The history of international relations. But my childhood was a very nice one, a very peaceful one. Brazil, so I was born in 1988. Brazil in the 1990s was a country that was starting to recover from a lot of political and economic problems it faced in the 70s and in the 80s. So, for example, the military regime I just mentioned, it ended in 85. By 88, Brazil had a democratic constitution. Throughout the 90s, the inflation problem, which was a terrible problem in Brazil, was being solved. So I think I was born in a very privileged time of Brazilian history, right?
So, how have you ever done radio or podcast or something before in school, college?
No, not in school. I mean, I graduated. I finished school in 2006. That time there was no such thing. There wasn't even smartphones. So podcast, I think.
Or
No, I
for a
don't.
fact, even some plays, dramas, anything.
No, not that I remember. I mean, I've taken part in some plays in school, but just because I had to, it wasn't something that I really enthusiastic about. I have a friend in Brazil. He's also majoring in history. He has like a channel on Instagram in which he talks about religions, and I did give an interview to him about Islam, about Pakistan, because he wanted to know more about it. That was last year. Unfortunately, it was in Portuguese, so I cannot share it with you, right? But it was a very good opportunity to demystify a lot of misconceptions that people in the West have about Islam and about Pakistan.
So, what was your family's reaction when you said that you'd be working in Pakistan?
Oh, that's a great question. I tell this story to everyone, to all my students. So I was admitted in Habib in March 2020, but I only told my parents that I had applied and that I had been accepted in June
Oh.
2020. Right? Again, there was so March. One week after I got an interview with Dr. Chris Taylor telling that I had been accepted by Habib. So the whole pandemic came out and there were lockdowns and there were all those things that we already know. So I didn't want to scare my parents too much because there was already a lot going on. And one of the reasons why I didn't want to tell them in advance is because I feared that they would make some pressure for me to give up. So I did everything I had to do. I signed the contract. I answered positively to Chris Taylor's proposal. Said yes, I'm in. I'm in. So that when I told my parents, everything was already set up, and I said, okay, I cannot go back.
No turning back.
No turning back. Exactly. And so we were having dinner in June. I think it was 24th of June. I usually remember the dates because I'm a historian, right? So, and then I told my parents, okay, I have an announcement to make. And my mother was like, oh my God, are you getting married? Is your girlfriend pregnant? What's going on? And then I told them, no, I got a job. I got an offer for an academic position at a very good salary at a very good university. And I have said yes. I have already signed the contract. And they asked me, oh, that's nice. Where is it? And I said, in Karachi. And my parents were like, where is Karachi? And I said, Pakistan. And then, and then my father, the look in my father's face when I told him that I was going to Pakistan is something that I will never forget in my entire life. He stood up and he walked away. He said, I don't agree with that. I'm not in favor. My mother was more like, she tried to understand me. She was more tolerant. And then she asked me, okay, but isn't Pakistan that country where there are war and terrorists all the time? And I said, I think you're confusing it with Afghanistan. But anyway, this is a very simplistic view, right? And I used this conversation that I had with my parents to explain my students about the concept of Orientalism by Edward Said. Right? Because none of my parents are historians, none of my parents are from the humanities. They had never been to any Muslim country. But just by mentioning the name of a Muslim country, the first thing that comes to their mind is war, violence, terrorism, intolerance. Right? So I don't blame my parents, okay? I mean, this is something that, as we all know, it's common. This is the common misconception that Western people have about Pakistan and about Muslim countries as a whole. But I always try to use my experience here in Pakistan to show them that, hey, Pakistan is not a country of terrorists, of war, of intolerance, right? There's much more to it, okay? And just like Pakistan has its problems, Brazil also has its problems. For example, from the 50 most violent cities in the world, around 10 of them are in Brazil. None of them are in Pakistan, right? So I told my parents, look, Brazil is much more dangerous than you can imagine.
So can you draw any parallels between
Pakistan
Pakistan
and
and
Brazil.
Brazil?
In terms of what precisely?
Social, political,
Hmm.
things like that.
Yeah, I mean, since we're talking both, since they're both post-colonial countries, right? I think some challenges and some problems are similar, but since culturally speaking they're so different, there are also a lot of there's also a lot of contrast between both countries. So among the similarities, I remember when I was in Aga Khan Hospital, I was talking to the doctor when I told him that I couldn't speak Urdu, and I told him that I was Brazilian. He asked the same question: what are the similarities between Brazil and Pakistan? And one of the first things that I said was like military regimes, right? So since I study military regime, I offered a course on military regimes. The fact that both countries had experiences with military rule is something that unites them. Social inequality, also very strong in both countries. Uh, Gender inequality to a certain extent. Both are societies that have a lot of sexism, a lot of prejudice against not only women but also LGBTQ community.
Mhm.
Our current president is a very good example of this. Um, I think these are both countries that are struggling for social development and for economic improvement, for economic development, right? Both of them are searching for national sovereignty and for reducing the dependence on foreign capital. Inflation, definitely, inflation is part of the history of Brazil, even more than in Pakistan. And the last thing that I think that unites both countries, the issue of global warming, right?
Right.
So recently we had elections in Brazil. A new president was elected, and Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, in his Twitter, he congratulated the new president, saying that both Pakistan and Brazil share common interests in fighting global warming, right? Although there's also a lot of difference. So Pakistan is one of the largest Muslim countries. Brazil is one of the largest Catholic countries in the world. Just like there are very few Christians here, there are very few Muslims in Brazil. Although the Muslim population in Brazil is slowly growing, both because of Syrian refugees who come to Brazil, and also because some Brazilians, they usually convert to Islam. They find it a very interesting. They like the message of Islam. They like the fact that Islam is not so different from Christianity, after all, that they have the same roots. This is something that many Brazilians do not know, right? And yeah, I think these are the main similarities and differences.
Speaking of Bolsonaro, we got a question from one of our audience members
Mhm.
beforehand, and they asked you to talk about Bolsonaro's current situation there, the supporters that are pleading for the military to take over.
Mhm.
Do you have anything you'd like to say about that?
Yeah, so the military in Brazil, although I said that military regimes is something that unites the Brazilian and Pakistani history,
Mm-hmm.
I think in Brazil, they, at least in the current situation, they don't have the power to take over.
Okay.
Neither the power nor the will to take over, right? Most recently, actually today or yesterday, the military. So because in Brazil we have an electronic ballot system,
Okay.
right? Which they wanted to adopt in Pakistan, but it wasn't
Yeah.
adopted. And many people, they question, they challenge the legitimacy of the system, because they say that these electronic ballots, they are very easily hacked. You can just hack into them and distort the results of the elections. The military, the right wing people, the conservatives, they are the most reluctant to accept the electronic ballot. And considering that Bolsonaro was defeated in these elections, they are coming up with this argument again, saying that these electronic ballots, they are not reliable. But again, today or yesterday, the military, they have just finalized what do you call it, like a process of checking the security or the safety of this electronic system. They found no major problems, no major issues, and they have endorsed the results of the elections, which came out as a surprise to many sectors of civil society who were protesting Bolsonaro's defeat, who wanted the military to interfere and not let the current the elected President Lula to take office. But now with the military endorsing or accepting the results of the elections, most probably these protests, they will lose some of their strength. I don't think they're going to be over so soon, but they will lose much of their power. These year's elections in Brazil were a very interesting one because in Brazil, presidential elections happen every 4 years, right? And they always coincide with the World Cup. So usually we have the football World Cup in June or July, elections in October. So whatever the results of the World Cup are, they usually influence the presidential elections, because if Brazil wins, the current president used this as a political weapon, and if it loses, the opposition uses this as a weapon, as saying, hey, look, Brazil is so terrible that we won the World Cup. And trust me, in the minds of many people in Brazil, that is an argument that makes sense. But this is the first time that the elections are being held before the World Cup, right? Because the World Cup is going to be in November. So it wasn't possible for any of the candidates to use the World Cup as a political weapon.
That's interesting because in Pakistan, the cricket is used a lot.
Exactly. And now Pakistan has the chance to become the world champion after 20 years, right?
Something like
Almost,
that.
It was 1992 when Imran Khan was
20 years.
Was the captain.
That was the 50 over World Cup. This is the T20 World Cup.
Those are different World Cups. Okay, I'm still trying to get familiar.
But this is like 20-ish years,
Okay. But which one is more important?
I think the 50 over one is more important.
Okay.
Right now, the 20 over one is happening. They're still important. Like we like cricket, it doesn't matter. Any international cricket tournament.
As long as Pakistan is winning.
Yes.
I mean, a lot of people argued that yesterday's holiday was because people could watch the semi-final.
That makes sense.
And the government was trying to appease the population because they're not happy with them right now. So this was part of it. That's what some people are saying.
Okay, but they said it was because of
Iqbal's.
Yes.
Sure, we believe that.
If I had PEMSA class yesterday, I was supposed to talk about Iqbal. So it was very ironic that because of Iqbal, I couldn't talk about Iqbal.
Yeah, fair. So usually we ask our guests about their time in university, and most people go abroad to do their master's or PhD. You did it in Brazil only. Why is that?
Why I did in Brazil?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, so this is another difference that I noticed between Brazil and Pakistan in terms of the academic environment. Here in Pakistan, people strive to go for their undergraduate or master's overseas, right? This is not something so common in Brazil. I'm not saying that it doesn't happen, it happens. But again, there's the issue of language.
Right.
Many Brazilians go to Portugal because it's the same language, right? So Portugal, and also Spanish-speaking countries, because Spanish and Portuguese are very similar. But not all Brazilians, even in the academic environment, are confident enough to study in English. So most Brazilians, they stay in Brazil, they do their master's, their undergraduate in Brazil. I did try to do, so if for my undergraduate and for my master's, I've done in Brazil. I didn't have a problem with that. For my PhD, I tried to go overseas. I tried to do my PhD in Singapore, right? I was admitted by 2 universities, but without scholarship. And Singapore is a very expensive country. Yeah. The university fees are very expensive. So, and I had already gotten a scholarship in a Brazilian university, right? So I said, it's better if I just stay here. Brazilian universities are not among the top universities in the world, but they're not so bad either. So I think it would, the cost benefit of staying in Brazil would be much better.
So we were told by our audience that you have also taught in a high school before.
Yes.
Before coming to university. How's that like, and what are the differences?
You mean between high school in Brazil and Pakistan? Sorry, between high school and university?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. So I didn't teach long. So initially, when I was still an undergraduate student, I started as an intern in a high school, but I wasn't really a teacher. I was a, what is it? I think tutor is the best translation.
Teacher's
Okay.
assistant.
Yeah, like a teacher's assistant, although I didn't really meet the teacher. So they would have the classes in the morning, usually in the morning, and in the afternoon, if they had questions about the exercises, about the content, they would come to me and they would ask me questions. Right? Not only to me, there were other tutors for all the subjects. And this is, yes, I worked in this as a tutor for like from 2010 to 2014 or 15, around 4 years. Then after I was done with my master's, I started teaching in a high school, which it wasn't really a high school. It was like a course to prepare students for entering university, for the exams to enter university. Because in Brazil, before entering university, there are some exams that you have to take, like national exams.
Yeah.
And I was teaching them, I was preparing them for that exam. So those are my students. They were mostly like in their 18 or 19 years old. They had already finished high school, but they didn't manage to get to enter university yet. So I think there's a huge difference because in high school or in this place where I taught, it's basically just factual content,
Yeah.
and it's basically just me talking and then them taking notes. Right? There's no discussion. There's no debate. There is no uh, there is no room
Conversation.
for conversation and for divergence, for inquiry, right? They just want to know the correct answer so that they can pass
Yeah.
their exams, right?
Yeah.
Whereas in university, it's very different, right? You need to give some space for students to speak. You have to encourage students to inquiry. You have to show them that there's no right or wrong answer, especially in the humanities. And you give them much more freedom to write and to question and to 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 come up with new perspectives, right? So I think university is the place of creativity, of imagination, of critical thinking, whereas schools, they're usually much narrower.
So, speaking of students, what are three things that you like about students at Habib?
Three things. I think students at Habib, they're much more willing to take challenges, right? They're much, not all of them, but most of them, they are much more open to challenges, right? So whenever I ask a question, an unexpected question, whenever I try to challenge their assumptions about something, they are very much inclined, not necessarily to agree with me, but at least to give it some thought. As in saying, okay, I might not agree with that, but let's make sure that I really don't agree, right? So I think willingness to take new challenges. Second thing, I think students at Habib University, they are much more, their critical thinking is much more developed, right? So, for example, in Brazilian universities, science students from engineering, from computer science, in many public universities, they are also forced to take like something similar to the liberal core here, although much poorer, not so substantial as Habib's liberal core. And many of them do this just by obligation. Right? I remember I had many colleagues when I was majoring in history. Some of my colleagues were engineers. They were computer scientists, and you could clearly see in their faces that like I'm doing this just because I have to. And many of my students, they do not do this, right? They show legitimate interest in learning history, in learning political science, in learning philosophy. And some of the best students that I had in modernity and in PEMSA, which are the two liberal core courses that I teach, were science students. Not all of them. Many people from SDP and CH and CND were also good, but I had some outstanding science students in my liberal core courses. And the third, I think there's so much to say. I think the third thing is like the respect that the students have for the instructors and the affection, mainly the affection, right? Of usually sending us sugar cubes or giving us gifts and presents. Someone might say, oh, they have ulterior reasons, right? They want to perform well. This is why they're trying to please you. But that's not the case. I mean, sometimes even after the semester is over, all the grades are posted. I still get sugar cubes. I still get presents. I get sugar cubes from students from people who had never been my students before,
Yeah.
who had been before but are no longer,
That's really
right? So that's affection. That's very, very nice. And I think sometimes we instructors should also try to reciprocate that. I try to do
I've
that.
seen it in your office, all the sugar cubes
Yes,
on
yes.
your board.
That's way more important than any kind of articles published or than any kind of things in your curriculum. I mean, if I could put all those sugar cubes in my curriculum, I would definitely do that.
So what's your reaction when you know that you have such a huge fan club? Like, I'm sure you know of that one comment that you got from last semester, probably, that if aliens come on Earth, you're the best that we can.
Yeah, I hear that a lot.
humanity.
I wonder who said that.
I know who said that.
You know? Okay,
Yeah.
no, okay. It's confidential information, right? We cannot. It's it's classified
Yeah,
information.
that's
I mean, it's nice. As I said to some of my students in PEMSA, in my first iteration of PEMSA, the first time I taught PEMSA, coming to such a different country in such terrible moments of pandemic and online teaching, abandoning your family, coming to live here alone is really, really hard. So it must be worth it, right? Whenever I talk to my parents through WhatsApp, video call, I have to show them that my experience here is worth it and that I have good reasons to stay here. And one of the main strategies to create or to prove or to give evidence that my stay here is worth it, that things are working out, is showing them that I have a good relation, not only with my colleagues, right, with the other instructors, but also with my students. After all, this is a student-centered university,
Yeah.
right? Unlike the universities where I studied in Brazil,
Yeah.
where, with all due respect to my professors, most of them didn't care about the students. They just cared about their own research. Here, we must care about our students, and I think that's legitimate, that it's valid, right? And when I joined Habib, one of the things that I noticed, one of the things that I try to tell myself all the time is that I want my students to have the opportunity or the experience that I didn't have when I was an undergraduate student. Because my instructors in university, they wouldn't answer my emails, they wouldn't receive me in their offices, they would barely read my assignments, they would deduct marks without explaining, right? Because they were too busy with their personal lives, with their careers, with their articles, with their research, so that teaching for many of them was just a secondary or irrelevant activity. Their students were irrelevant for them. And I told myself, I don't want my students to get this experience. I want them to have whatever I didn't have. And I think one of the most rewarding things for any faculty member, for any professor or teacher, is to see that their students are having something that they didn't have. Just like one of the most pleasant things to our parents is to give us something that they didn't have.
I think one of the best moments of the semester was when you got that huge round of applause in the PAMSA lecture.
Which one?
I think last week.
No.
Oh, this semester. I had
this semester.
the lecture about the Japanese.
Yeah.
And the posters.
So since you add so many memes, and that's something that we really enjoy, do you have a meme folder that you go back to for your presentations?
A meme? Sorry, a
Do
meme?
you collect memes or do you?
Yeah, I follow many historical memes pages on Facebook and on Instagram. So I usually get those memes from there. Some of them I make myself. I'm not really proud of saying that because this might lead my students to think that I have some sort of mental problem or that I'm disturbed, right? But I mean, I think since many students are taking these liberal core courses out of obligation, not because they like to, but because they have to, I think conveying messages through memes can make the class more engaging and more interesting, right? It's sometimes the message that you're trying to convey is very hard, but as important as the content of the message is the means through which you convey that message. So if you choose the right means, if you choose the right memes, the message, as hard as it may be, can be much more easily understood by your audience.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So let's talk about your life outside of Habib now. What do you do on your day off? Like,
What
what
do you
is your
do
life
to
like? What's your
relax
normal day
yourself? Yeah.
like? Yeah.
There's no life for me outside Habib, honestly. I mean, I truly mean it. I don't have a life outside Habib. I wake up, I come to Habib. I do everything I have to do. I go back. I try to detox from email, from phone by watching some series on Netflix, and then I sleep and come to Habib again.
So what do you do on weekends?
Nothing. I prepare classes, I grade assignments. If I have time, I write my dissertation. Now I'm not writing, I'm just revising it. Yesterday I finished chapter 4, and I'm very happy for this. There's another 3 chapters to revise, not to finish,
Yeah.
but to revise. And yeah, but I don't really do much in my free time, again, because of my dissertation, right? Hopefully by February or March, when I'm done with this dissertation, I would like to know more places to go out more. But I have been to quite a lot of places at Karachi. So, for example, I've been to Mohata Palace, which I really enjoyed. I loved Fair Hall. They have a book fair there on Saturday or Sunday. I think it's Sunday morning, right? I was amazed to see the books. I even met Afzal Sahab there. He was there. We had like a small talk. I have been to the library that they have at Fair Hall a couple of weeks ago, in which I had another episode regarding ladies' spaces, which I don't know whether I should tell here. It wasn't nothing a big deal. So I sat in one table. There was later came a girl and sat in front of me, and then one of the employees in the library said, "Oh, this is a ladies' space." But again, there was no sign. There was nothing. So I feel that Pakistanis, they already grow with this sense that, okay, this is ladies' space, this is male space, and I don't have this idea or this notion, right? But I really like the library at Fair Hall. But my favorite place here in Karachi was the mausoleum, the Mazar-e-Qaid, which I visited last year. And honestly, I went to Mazar-e-Qaid and I spent like maybe 3 or 4 hours there because I couldn't leave. I was roaming around the mausoleum. One of the guards thought I was lost. So he came to me and asked, "Are you looking for something?" I said, "No, I just can't leave this place because I'm fascinated. I want to stay here the whole day." And he was very nice to me. He was very proud to hear that from a foreigner. And he said, "No, you can stay here as much as you want. If you need anything, any help, if you want me to take pictures for you, I will take." So it was really, really nice.
Um, you mentioned that you're watching something on Netflix. What do you watch usually?
I didn't used to watch. I usually I didn't watch series. I started watching series this year, like in January.
Okay.
Because I found that it is a good way of detoxing from work and also from your phone, right? Until January this year, whenever I went back home, I would just stay on my phone doing useless stuff, right? And I think that starting watching series was something that forced me to leave my phone aside and focus on something interesting, right? On something entertaining. So I started. The first series I watched was a Korean one, Penthouse, War in Life. I don't know if you've ever watched it. A very violent and brutal one. But I think it was my favorite one so far. I really, really loved it. After Penthouse, I watched. There was a series about Bolivar, Simon Bolivar, who was the leader of the independences of some South American countries, like Bolivia, Venezuela, Colombia. And I was watching this series as I was teaching a course about Bolivar last semester, the world historical figures. At the end of the course, I even showed some episodes of this series. Next semester, I'll be teaching the same course again. I'll be trying to show more episodes to my students. After that, so I watched several series. All of them usually have to do with historical context, historical episodes. Right now, I'm watching one The name is 1983. It's a Polish series about a dystopian scenario in which Poland is ruled by an authoritarian regime, and there are some liberation movements trying to seize power. I'm not. I must confess, it's a bit boring. I'm a bit bored by this series, but I'm trying to give it another chance.
Have you watched The Man in the High Castle?
Yes, I watched that one as well.
Yeah, like I really like that one.
That was amazing. I forgot
Yeah.
about that. The Man in the High Castle I watched last year.
Hmm.
I didn't watch until the end
Yeah.
because the last episodes I didn't really like it, but the first seasons were just amazing.
Yeah.
I really really enjoyed it.
We also heard that you used to like anime. Or do you still revisit
Yes.
it?
No, I don't watch animes anymore. No, in my childhood, I used to watch a lot, not only animes, but Japanese live actions.
Okay.
Did you have this in Pakistan, like Power Rangers? So Power Rangers is American, right? But like Japanese
Power
shows similar to Power Rangers. Did you have any of these in Pakistan?
We did have Power Rangers, I think.
Yeah, I think Nickelodeon telecasted
Yeah,
Power
something like
Rangers.
that.
Yeah, there was one channel which telecasted.
But how about Japanese live actions? Did you?
I think
Watch
we had.
They were dubbed, if even if they were telecasted.
I don't know. We had like Doraemon and stuff.
Doraemon.
That's Japanese, right?
Yeah. No, the thing is, in Brazil in the 1980s and 90s, the Brazilian television was flooded with these Japanese shows.
Okay.
They're all dubbed as well, and I used to watch them a lot. And I even tell this for my students in modernity how I wanted to be just like a Japanese when I was a kid. My mom says that I would usually stare myself at the mirror doing like this with my eyes because I wanted to be just like them. And yeah, I think my interest, because I have always been very interested in Asian history, in Asian culture, and this interest was definitely sparked by these TV shows.
So did you watch Takeshi's Castle and stuff like that?
No, the one we didn't have in Brazil.
Okay.
I think that they broadcasted this only in Asia.
Okay.
I think so. In Brazil, we had other. They were mostly live action, similar to Power Rangers, but they had other names like Changeman, Flashman. There was a Jiraiya, who was a ninja. Jiban, who was like a cop, almost like RoboCop, although it was a Japanese version. Yeah, I don't think they showed it. Perhaps they showed them in Pakistan, but you were too young to remember.
Probably.
Because I'm talking here about the 90s. You were all born like in 2000, 2000
Yeah.
something,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, so perhaps you didn't.
In the 90s, from what I know, is that we only had the state-run television, PTV, and they didn't telecast a lot of foreign content in general.
Ah, okay.
And they had like a slot from like 8 p.m. till 10 p.m. They'd be only be showing certain things. And then it was 2007 when Musharraf actually opened it up and we were able to get foreign content.
Yeah.
Really? Only 2007?
Yeah, it was very late that Pakistan was exposed to foreign content. Otherwise, we were not. It was just local channels.
Not even in cable TV?
No.
In cable TV particularly. Otherwise, there were cassettes and VCRs that did have foreign content, but other than that, on cable, it was only
Only
state controlled.
Pakistan. Okay.
As far as I know,
Okay. That's interesting.
which can be argued. Okay, we're reaching the end of our show, and we're gonna be asking you a couple of questions
Mhm.
as we have been doing. Go ahead.
So, rapid fire.
No,
Oh,
just
okay.
the floor.
Okay, so what is your favorite part about Habib?
Just one.
Favorite spot on campus, okay.
Sorry?
Favorite spot on campus.
Since they have put those paintings in the courtyard, I think that's my favorite place. 'Cause
Oh,
I
you
love
like
those
the
paintings.
paintings?
That's why you don't?
No, I was like, why did you ruin the space?
No, I like the one about the partition. The one by Jimmy Engineer.
Right. I didn't see it.
I forgot the name of that painting. Very famous one. I'm showing the migration.
Okay.
We
People
will see it
migrating
now.
from Pakistan.
Now that
I just thought the aesthetic choice was wrong for the area.
Yeah, maybe. Are you a CND student?
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe that's why you're more critical than me. I mean, I loved it.
So, what are your thoughts on students being emotionally vulnerable towards students? Have you ever faced that? And if not, how do you plan on dealing with it?
Sorry, students
Students being
being
emotionally vulnerable, there are
vulnerable.
In front of
in front of
professors.
professors.
Okay. So the question is, how do I feel, or how do I
Have you faced that? And if not, how do you plan on facing it?
Yeah, I mean, I think I feel not right in front of me,
Hmm.
but through emails, through messages. I do remember sometimes some students were struggling, and I think the way I usually try to manage that, but I must confess that this is something that I still need to improve, is that first of all, I have to be emotionally stable, because if I am also vulnerable or unstable, I won't be able to help them, right?
Yeah.
In my first years at Habib, I'm not gonna lie that I wasn't emotionally stable for all the reasons that I have already mentioned. Everything, so many things happening at the same time, so I sometimes I was more unstable than my students. But now I'm trying to work on my emotional, on putting less pressure on me, right? So that I can become more understanding towards my students, and more empathetic towards them. The fact that I am also a student, that I am also struggling with academic issues with my dissertation, helps create some empathy towards my students by saying, hey, just like I needed an extension for my deadline to submit my dissertation, my students sometimes might also need extensions. But on the other hand, the fact that we are in the same position can also cause some problems, right? Because I'm under a lot of pressure, and sometimes this reflects or this influences or affects my relations with my students. So keeping myself emotionally stable and not putting so much pressure on me.
So, what do you like to eat at Habib? Your favorite
Sorry?
snack at Habib?
Oh my God, that's a hard one. Again, just one.
Okay, you can name
Three
Sorry.
at least.
three at least.
Okay, three. The French fries. The guy.
Yeah.
What is the name of that
Rahim
guy?
bhai.
Rahim bhai.
Rahim Bhai.
Yeah.
Yeah, Rahim
I mean,
bhai.
those are amazing, honestly. Especially when he adds cheese and all those stuff. It's just very good. I like the Dukan shop, the Bounty chocolate. It's my favorite. Mr. Kashif, right?
Kashif.
Kashif.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm always there buying a chocolate from him. And uh, I also like the lasagna here in the coffee to go, because yeah, I like whenever I miss my food at home, I eat at coffee to go because they have pasta lasagna, which is something that we eat a lot in Brazil.
So, what is something that you see in students at Habib and think, oh, I wish I also had that in my undergrad?
Oh, so many things. Teachers answering their emails, because that's something that I definitely didn't have. Teachers answering my emails, advising. I didn't have advising in my university. Uh, 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 a liberal core, which I didn't have in my university, although I did a history. But I wish I had. I also wish I had a minor in my university. We didn't have opportunity to do minors, so I just have a degree in history, no, nothing else, right? And also language classes like Punjabi, Urdu. Do you also have Sindhi?
Yeah.
As well, right? Yes. I also wish I had that.
So, which is one course that you would just like to go and sit in and listen?
If I knew Urdu, it would be Jehane Urdu.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and I wish Habib could have like Urdu classes for non-Urdu speakers, because I know that many students are not good at Urdu, right?
Yeah, so Inam Saab, he told us that he is trying to create a course
Oh, that would be
for
amazing.
like surface level course for beginners, so that they can take that course before they take Jahani Urdu for people
Okay.
who are not good at Urdu, so that they don't struggle in Jahani Urdu. So yeah,
I would definitely take this course. It would be interesting to be colleagues of one of my students, right? But this is a course that I would definitely take.
so is there any musical instrument you would like to learn at Habib?
The tabla, tabla.
Yeah,
What is
tabla.
that? Tabla,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
tabla, definitely. I love seeing Dr. Yusuf playing them.
And the last question: who is one faculty member that you would want to see on this show?
On this show,
Yeah.
oh my god, so many. I think
You can name more than one.
more than one.
You top three.
Top three, okay. Dr. Hadis, definitely.
Mhm.
I'd like to see him here. Uh, I think Basharat
Oh,
Oh,
would be an
yeah.
interesting guest. And so Dr. Hadis, Basharat, and oh my god, I'm trying to think someone outside CH. Mr. Bezat.
Oh,
Okay.
okay.
Yeah.
Bezat, definitely. I had some very interesting talks with him,
Mm-hmm.
and I think he would be doing a lot of contribution here.
Yeah.
I also forgot to ask one thing. Do you have a faculty bestie at Habib?
Faculty?
Best friend or some who you really hang out with?
No, not really. I think it's not that I don't like them. I like all of them. I never had any problem with them. But this is something that since my childhood is something very, very particular to me. I never really had that group of people or that people with whom I always hanged out. I don't know why. So I talk a lot with mostly with other CH faculty, right? But since my life is so hectic, since I'm always rushing for a class or for finishing my dissertation, I would rather not stick to any group or any person because I want to have like freedom
Understandable.
or liberty.
So, last thing, would you like to plug your new course or anything that you're teaching next semester and you'd like to tell our audience about?
Yeah, I'm not teaching any new courses next semester. Next semester, I'm teaching modernity, 2 sections as usual. I will be teaching another iteration of world historical figures. In this, it's the same course I taught last semester, although I have changed the readings. I have simplified the readings, and I'll be trying to use more audiovisual material like songs and movies. So it's a course about Simon Bolivar and Toussaint Louverture. So Toussaint Louverture was a slave, an ex-slave who led an uprising in Haiti that led to the Haitian independence. And I was very impressed to see that one of the sections of Habib United Nations, Mother United Nations, was about this Haitian revolution. It was very nice to see that. And the other historical figure we will be studying is Simon Bolivar, who was the leader of independence in some South American countries. Those of you who are willing to take or to audit the course, you're more than welcome to do so. And I would also like to invite you to watch the series about Bolivar on Netflix. The name is just Bolivar, Bolivar, right? It's very long, 60 episodes, but it's worth it. Okay. And I will also be teaching another co-teaching with Dr. Haris and Hana, Conceptual Genealogies, the Master Slave Dialectic, in which we'll be talking about slavery in Haiti and in Brazil.
Okay. Thank you so much for giving us your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you
Great.
for inviting
We really
me.
enjoyed.
My pleasure.